They said it happened back in the early 90s, winter of 92 if I remember right. A man named Paul Winters, in his late 40s, was living alone in a small town in upstate New York. He'd moved into a modest apartment above a bait shop after a quiet divorce that didn't make headlines and didn't leave much behind. He didn't talk about it often, but from what people knew, it had been one of those slow dissolves, the kind that doesn't come from screaming matches or slammed doors but from years of growing silent at the dinner table. He worked night shifts at the paper mill. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough, and the hours suited him. Mornings were usually spent in a booth at the local diner, sipping black coffee and reading the paper without really seeing it. His life was a string of ordinary days, unremarkable in every way. That February, he had to take a train into Albany for a dental appointment. It wasn't something he usually did. He wasn't fond of the city or of dentists, but the appointment was early, so he caught the 7:42 a.m. train. That's when he first saw her. She was sitting across the aisle, a woman in her 30s perhaps, dressed plainly in a long wool coat with her hair pulled into a loose braid. She had a novel in her lap and a pencil behind her ear, like someone who liked to scribble notes in the margins. She didn't seem nervous or hurried, just quiet. He wouldn't have thought twice, except she had a certain presence about her, the kind that makes people glance again without knowing why. They didn't speak that first ride, at least not right away. Something small happened. A book slid off her lap, or maybe he offered her a napkin for the coffee spill on her sleeve. No one remembers the exact moment, but they ended up talking. The kind of talking that happens easily between strangers who don't expect to meet again. He mentioned where he worked, said something about the smell of ink that never washed off his hands. She said she was headed to a legal hearing, not dramatic, just closing an old chapter. They kept it light, but there was something underneath. A shared weight, maybe, or just a mutual recognition that both of them carried stories they hadn't told in years. He didn't ask her name. She didn't ask his. But the next week, they were both there again. Same train, same seats, and again the week after that. Some said it was coincidence. Others thought maybe one of them adjusted their schedule to match the others. Either way, it became a ritual. Tuesday mornings on the 7:42. Over the next couple of months, they came to know each other through the things they chose to share. The safe things, and some not so safe. He talked about his daughter, who'd gone off to college and rarely called, about the silence that grew between him and his ex-wife long before the paperwork was filed. She spoke of a man she'd once loved but never married, a man whose letters she still kept in a box under her bed. Neither of them asked for more. There was no exchange of phone numbers, no plans made. Just that hour each week where the world seemed a little softer. Nothing about it was romantic in the traditional sense. There were no lingering glances or brushed hands. It was something subtler, a sort of quiet companionship, a space where neither had to perform, explain, or apologize, a connection built entirely on the present moment. Then one Tuesday she wasn't there. He assumed she'd missed the train. When it happened again the next week, he began to wonder. By the third week, he knew. He didn't tell anyone. He just stopped riding the 7:42. He returned to his usual habits, night shifts, the diner, the same walk home past shuttered shops and rusted fences. But something about the town felt different now, as if it had dulled in her absence. He found himself noticing trains more often, not just the 7:42. He watched strangers board and disembark, sometimes catching a glimpse of someone with dark hair or a familiar coat, and feeling his heart quicken for a moment before settling back into stillness. He didn't talk to anyone about her, not because he was hiding it, but because there was nothing to explain. She had been there and then she wasn't, and something about that made the experience feel more his than anyone else's. Months passed. Then, in May, he received a letter. Plain envelope, no return address. Inside, just a short note in handwriting he recognized instantly. Tight, careful, and elegant. She hadn't signed her name. She never had. But she thanked him for those mornings. Said she hadn't meant to disappear, but there had been things she couldn't bring with her. Mentioned an illness. She didn't name it, but the tone said more than the words. And then came the part he never forgot. She'd left something for him at a used bookstore in Albany. Said it would be waiting behind the counter. Told him to ask for the red volume of Dickinson. He went that weekend. The bookstore was small, tucked between a locksmith and an empty storefront. The kind of place that smelled like old paper and coffee grounds. He didn't have to explain much. The man at the counter simply nodded and disappeared into the back, returning a few minutes later with a red leather-bound book. Inside on the first page was a photograph. She was younger in it, sitting in a field of tall grass, caught mid-laugh. Next to the photo, a handwritten line. The first stanza of a Dickinson poem about hope being the thing with feathers. No name, no goodbye. Just that. Some people might have tried to find her after that. Searched records, called hospitals, tried to fill in the blanks. But Paul didn't. He read the book. Then he placed it on a shelf above his bed. And every Tuesday morning for years after, he still woke before sunrise, made coffee, and watched the train pass by from his window. He never boarded it again, but he watched it, as if by simply witnessing its passing, he was keeping some small part of those mornings alive. Over the years, the memory of her remained a quiet echo in the corners of his life. He never spoke her name. He didn't have one to speak. But she was present in the way he lingered at bookstore shelves, in the way he sometimes paused when he passed the train station, or how he looked a little longer at women with dark braids and winter coats. He aged slowly and quietly, like someone who had already lived their one unexpected story. When he finally retired from the mill, he still kept the same routine. Still rose early on Tuesdays. Still made the same coffee. Still watched the 742 from his window. He said it gave the day structure, but some believed he was still waiting for something, or someone, even if he wouldn't admit it. Long after Paul was gone, a neighbor cleaning out his apartment found the red Dickinson book on the shelf, still untouched since he'd first placed it there. Tucked inside, carefully preserved, was the note and the photograph. No one ever claimed them, but the neighbor kept the book. And every now and then, on a quiet morning, they say he takes it down and reads that line about hope. Because even now, there are still people who believe that certain meetings, no matter how brief, were never accidents. Thank you for listening. Until the next heartbeat in a story. Subscribe and stay for more love in every word.